I just got on watching the new Fantastic Four movie and I realized something. Galactus as a villain kinda sucks. Now, let me explain before you start leaving your hate comments. I think undoubtedly Galactus as a character and as a concept is super cool and interesting. Like this huge cosmic monster that eats planets and sends out heralds to find him more planets to satisfy his hunger is super horrifying and such a cool concept as a character that I would love to see more of. But when it comes to him being a villain in a story, he kinda just sucks at being a villain of a story, since it is pretty hard to tell a story about Galactus, a literal planet eater, where the story ends in a satisfying way or ends in a way that isn't so predictable. Since realistically, the Fantastic Four should never be able to defeat Galactus or even really stand a chance against Galactus, since he is a literal planet eater and they are just ants compared to him. And the Fantastic Four should lose 10 out of 10 times against Galactus. And when the Fantastic Four do win against Galactus, we always have to do some insane mental gymnastics to explain how the plot led to how the Fantastic Four were even able to beat this world eater known as Galactus. Because Galactus is kind of like a god figure in the Marvel universe who has existed even before the universe even started. So which either ending you want to pick, where the Fantastic Four wins or Galactus actually eats Earth, they both kind of end in unsatisfying ways or even predictable ways if the Fantastic Four do win, because you know the good guys always win at the end even if it's a godlike monster. So both endings end up predictable and even unsatisfying for most people. And the fact that we have yet to see Galactus eat Earth in any movie appearance is kind of crazy, since you know his whole literal thing is about he eats planets and we haven't even seen him eat a planet on screen yet. And I've come to realize that this is not only a Galactus problem but an overpowered villain problem in general, since in most stories with overpowered villains we have to jump through so many insane hoops to believe a superhero could ever be a villain who is 10 times stronger than they are. Now I'm not talking about like Bane fighting Batman or Zod fighting Superman. No, the power disparity I'm talking about is more like Batman versus Darkseid levels of power disparity, because Superman fighting Zod, even though Zod is a noticeably better fighter oftentimes, it's still not an overpowered villain for Superman. Wow, someone like Darkseid against Batman, unless it's a very campy version of Batman, Batman should not be winning that fight. Like, yeah, there are some stories where a hero can defeat an overpowered villain and it works and it feels satisfying and that overpowered character is well written, but oftentimes these overpowered characters are so heavily carried by the story and by other characters to make them even remotely interesting, since most of these overpowered villains, all they have is really aura and being strong most of the time. For example, like Galactus is so heavily carried story-wise by his heralds that oftentimes Galactus's heralds are way more interesting than Galactus himself. Like the fact that more people are fans of Silver Surfer than Galactus tells you a lot about Galactus as a character. And Marvel has even made series about people becoming heralds of Galactus, which shows you that they rather make stories about people becoming heralds than make stories about actual Galactus. But even though I'm saying this all about a Marvel character, Marvel is not the only one who faces this problem when it comes to overpowered villains. For example, if we look at DC's side, they have an overpowered villain problem as well, with one of their most iconic villains of all time named Doomsday, where Doomsday has had some of the most iconic stories in all of comic book history, but yet he faces a similar problem to Galactus, where his sole purpose in most stories is just to kill Superman. And ever since Doomsday did kill Superman in one of the most iconic comic book stories of all time, the death of Superman, Doomsday kind of never lived up to that legacy ever again, since you know, if he's not killing Superman, then he's kind of not that interesting. At least that's what the public perception is. Kind of like how if Galactus isn't eating a planet, a lot of people don't care for Galactus. And Doomsday faces a similar issue where that every time he's on screen, you're just wondering, well, will he kill Superman? So since the iconic moment of death of Superman, every Doomsday story has just been a guessing game where you wonder if he will actually kill Superman in this story. And every time he shows up in a new version of Superman, we're kind of just going through the motions of death of Superman, but maybe Superman might win this time. And they are kind of doing something very interesting with Doomsday nowadays, though, you know, they're at least taking strides with this character. But the point I'm trying to make by comparing these two iconic powerhouses in supervillain history is that Galactus faces a similar issue like Doomsday, where his gimmick of eating planets just can't be avoided in most stories, and in most stories it's just all about stopping Galactus from eating Earth, because you know, no one cares about any other planets in the universe when it comes to the Marvel universe. So for Galactus, much like Doomsday, in most stories Galactus is in, you just wonder if you actually get to eat Earth in this story, and the answer most of the time is probably no. And most of the time, overpowered villains really just come down to the gimmick, which is, you know, being overpowered or having some unique quirk that makes them overpowered. And these gimmicks kind of lead to a will they, won't they type of story. But instead of wondering if two lovers will get together, it's more about wondering if Galactus finally gets to eat Earth in this story, or if Doomsday finally gets to kill Superman again. Which in my opinion, these gimmicks are kind of both a gift and a curse for these type of villains, since on one hand, if they didn't have these gimmicks, they kind of wouldn't be so iconic. Like, these gimmicks make them pretty iconic. If Galactus didn't eat planets and he was just, super strong, a lot of people just wouldn't care about Galactus. And same thing with Doomsday. If Doomsday did not kill Superman, most people wouldn't know who Doomsday is unless you played Injustice 1, and you would really know how broken Doomsday is in that game. But the reason why these gimmicks are also a curse is because it stops them from having even more good stories, because they gotta stick to this iconic gimmick. Like, if you ask most people what stories do you know about Galactus, they will probably only know one story, which is the time Fantastic Four stopped Galactus from hitting Earth, and Silver Surfer was the herald that warned them about Galactus. But in reality, Galactus has so many other stories and so many other heralds besides the Silver Surfer that there's decades upon decades of Galactus history, but just no one really cares about it, or no one really knows about them unless you're kind of like a diehard fan of the comics. And even some diehard fans of the comics don't really even know much about Galactus, because there's really not that much to know besides these planets. Which the only reason I can possibly think on why these villains don't really have so many iconic stories and only have one story is probably because these villains kind of be like the final bosses for their respective heroes. They shouldn't be a reoccurring character who you can tell too many stories about, and aren't villains like a Joker or Magneto or Doctor Doom, where they can be a reoccurring villain that shows up at the beginning of a season, the middle of a season, and at the end of the season, or if it's in a comic run where they can be showing up in multiple issues and fighting the heroes multiple times. Because if Galactus and Doomsday decided to become a reoccurring villain that showed up, at the beginning of the week, the middle of the week, and at the end of the week, the world is cooked. It's looking like the fourth Impact. No one's surviving that type of reoccurring villain, which is why a character like the Joker, why a character like Magneto, and so many other villains who are not powerhouses can have so many good stories, because there's an actual opportunity to tell good stories with them, because it doesn't ultimately end with will this hero die or will this hero not die. It's more like, will this hero get severely injured, or will this villain get into prison and then break out again, and then we can tell another good story about this villain again. While Galactus, most of the time you're either defeating him or you're sending him pretty far off planet where he has to come back all the way to Earth again. So not too many opportunities to tell a good story with Galactus. And since these villains are considered end game bosses for superheroes, they usually show up in superhero careers who are very far experienced, who have gone through decades of battles, have fought so many villains, to where they're pretty much a veteran when it comes to being a superhero. And that's when a Darkseid or a Galactus will show up, unless you're Zack Snyder, who does that Death of Superman in only his second appearance. And there's so many other overpowered villains beside Galactus who have these issues, but these are kind of the two poster boys of being these overpowered villains who kind of are just stuck in this one story and have a hard time breaking out. For example, someone like Thanos is kind of stuck in the Infinity Saga story, where if Thanos doesn't have an Infinity Gauntlet, a lot of people don't care about Thanos for some reason, which I think Thanos is a pretty cool character, but his most iconic story is when he has Infinity Stone. But let me know what you guys think of overpowered villains. Do you like them? Do you not like them? For me, I prefer to see more grounded villains who are kind of more like an equal to their respective hero. And if there was supposed to be a power disparity, I would rather see the superhero way more stronger than his villain, kind of like a Superman versus Lex Luthor, where he has to hold back. Stuff like that, where the hero has to restrain himself from, destroying the villain, or where the villain has to think super smart and plan super accordingly to defeat their hero, is way more cool than a hero having to try to defeat this, unstoppable endgame boss. But let me know what you guys think of overpowered villains. Do you like them? Do you not like them? Let me know what is your favorite overpowered villain down in the comments. For me, it's probably Doomsday. Doomsday's super cool. I just like how much of a menace he is, even if he only has really one good story. But let me know your favorite down in the comments below. Also, let me know what you thought of the new Fantastic Four movie. Hope to see you guys next time. Later, hater. Peace.